Isn't that pretty? My first thought when I woke up this morning was, I'm going to listen to Bach partitas all day long. And I have kept that promise to myself. I bet you are in that mood once in a while too. They're so beautiful. Greeting you, week 6, lesson number 3, and I'll try to replicate as best I can what I talked about up in Staples Motley today for your sister class. I have, I guess, a couple, 3 poets in mind as I get going today. And the first poet is Spencer Reece, who I brought to the college in, I think, the fall of 2019. No, spring of 2019, just right before the world changed. Excuse me. Spencer is one of us. He's from Minnesota, although he lives in New York now, and he's had several lives as a man. He has he was a clothier. He worked at high-end clothing stores in the Mall of America across his 20s and 30s. Took up drinking like his dad and just about killed himself. Mended his ways, and when he came out of that, he went in a different direction. He's like, not only am I going to be a great American poet, I'm going to be an Episcopalian priest. And he went to Harvard and Yale's Divinity School. And it might sound a little strange to talk about a poet that I've already brought, but Spencer is going to come back to the college next fall. Jason Edens, who runs our Cultural Thursdays, has, I'm just getting to become friends with that guy, and we're collaborating on a project. I don't know if you know this, but on Cultural Thursdays, every Thursday at the college, just about, we do something that helps open up our heart to the idea that there's, other cultures in the world besides Minnesotan. I think today they had a Muslim gentleman come up from the cities to talk about Ramadan practices. And that's great. I mean, if you don't know anything about that, you can go. So I'm a bit discouraged because I can upload YouTube videos and sprinkle them onto my timeline of these humble lessons I'm trying to offer you, but I can't upload Vimeo. And so here's what I've done. Spencer, a few years ago, he got a McKnight Foundation grant, and he did something absolutely wonderful with it. He took the money and he went down to the Honduras, to the most dangerous town in that troubled, crime-ridden country, and he went to the only girls' orphanage there, and he spent some time trying to heal those girls with poetry and trying to get those girls forsaken by the world to think about themselves as writers, as people who could be makers or creators. These are girls that had been nearly murdered, left in wells, victims of the sex trafficking industry, and it was a project that had a lot of problems. And I'm so proud to be his friend, and I'm so excited that I'm going to be bringing him back and co-hosting him with Jason Edens, and we're going to talk about that project this fall at a Cultural Thursday. And I put up just a 2-minute video a few minutes ago in D2L, and click on it, give it a moment. And here we're talking about the idea that poetry can be a tool, it can be equipment that helps us live our lives. And what's so exciting for me is that a beautiful book came out of that project called Counting Time Like People Count Stars. And I'm really excited and proud that 4 poets, 4 verse-like water poets created that book. Marie Howe, Richard Blanco, Luis J. Rodriguez, who I hosted at Long Prairie Gray Eagle in the college. He's the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. We'll talk about him on another day. And Richard Blanco, who I've already introduced you to. And it's really beautiful. Getting a little bit serious here for a minute. I saw something today. I read something that really gave me pause, and because I'm working with so many young people that I just absolutely love, I need to say a couple things about it. And I don't know how it'll exactly come out. I don't know how it came out in Staples today. I guess I'll just do my best. But we're all looking back, right? We are at more or less the 3-year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic and the beginning of the time where everything got pretty different historically. And one, like boxcars, one disaster after another happened, beginning with the pandemic. And I think this stretch of history, which I don't think is regular history, I don't think this is regular. Something big is going on, something definitive, something epic. All of this began for me at a poetry reading at the College of St. Benedict. I love going to poetry readings hosted by my friends Rachel Marston and Matthew Harkins for the Literary Arts Institute at CSB. I love going there because I'm a guest, I'm an attendee. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to worry about feeding the poet, transporting the poet, writing the introduction, nothing. I just get to go and just be a citizen, so to speak, an attendee. And exactly 3 years ago this very week, I went to a poetry reading by Wen Mao. He was a dear friend of a poet that I hosted a year and a half ago at CLC named Jenny G. And I'll never forget that night. That's the night that I realized that the world was changing. I'd heard a thing or two about a virus on the other side of the world coming around at us. And that was the night it sunk in. That was the night that I realized that my charmed life and all of our lives were going to change. Wen Mao was angry. She was also swearing a lot. And the reason why she was upset is because this virus was coming around the planet like a storm, like a fire. And she's from Wuhan, China. That's her town, and she loves that city. And it really was heartbreaking to her that the world would finally know the name of her town for all the wrong reasons. And that was back when people were calling it the China flu and the Wuhan flu. And that I talked about that today, and I guess I'm still talking about it. She was angry, not without justification. To try to pull us towards poetry a little bit and then say something serious, I encountered today the results of a 10-year, a massive survey that was done by our Center for Disease Control, CDC. Now, I lost a lot of confidence in the CDC across the pandemic. In fact, most of my confidence, but I am paying attention to what they published today, which was a survey more or less reporting to the country on basically the situation with young people, adolescents in the United States of America. And the news is bad, particularly when we look at all the metrics possible when we compare teenagers in 2011 and teenagers in 2021, the last year for which data is available. And every marker is crashing. Rates of depression, rates of suicide. Apparently 10% of all teenagers either attempted a suicide in 2021 or thought about it. And as I worked on a psych ward a long time ago, I know that suicide ideation is a catastrophe, right? Like if you're thinking of a plan, that's not good. That's bad. And it's a crisis time for everyone. It's continuing, and it's particularly a hard time to be young. And most of the students in this course are in late adolescence. And I just want to say to you that I've been watching you and all your brothers and sisters now suffering more than I ever have across the last 3 years. And I made all my staple students today. I think Minnesota's better than most states. I mean, that was across the country. Tens of thousands of kids were surveyed. And I think that we're doing a little better in Minnesota because Minnesota, I think, is maybe this is a story I'm telling myself. Maybe I'm suffering a delusion right now, but I think Minnesota is a healthier place to live than most places in the United States. It's in the Midwest. I have the hunch, I don't know this, but my suspicion is that it's more stressful to be a teenager in Los Angeles or New York or other states, but that doesn't mean we are exempt. And I mainly made my staple students today realize, yeah, you picked a rather unlucky time to be a kid, the worst time ever, worst time since the flood. But I also made them realize that there is hope, particularly if you've got some connectedness in your high school, if you got a few friends. The data points out that if your parents are looking after you, keeping tabs on where you're going and who you're with, that helps a lot. And I made every single teenager in Staples today put their thumb up. I said, give me a thumbs up, and I want you to solemnly promise right now, make me an oath actually, that you in the days ahead, the weeks ahead, the months ahead, this year, next year, or ever after, if you feel like you're in trouble and you need help, get it. Put your thumb up if you promise me that you'll get it. And I can't see any of you right now because this is obviously a video that I'm going to launch. Maybe you could put your thumb up right now, and maybe I'll just sense that you did that. Here's a poem by the great Galway Kinnell on this very subject. He's older here and he's kind of fallen apart a little bit, but oh my goodness, was he a powerful and prolific American poet. And I'm going to poetry right now for this subject. He gives us the greatest advice in the world. If you're suffering, if your heart is broken, if you're wild with grief, for whatever stresses, for whatever reason in this troubled 21st century, just wait. Let's give him a chance.
I wrote this poem for a student who was thinking about suicide due to a love affair gone wrong. It's called Wait. Wait for now. Distrust everything if you have to, but trust the hours. Haven't they carried you everywhere up to now? Personal events will become interesting again. Hair will become interesting. Pain will become interesting. Buds that open out of season will become interesting. Second-hand gloves will become lovely again. Their memories are what give them the need for other hands. And the desolation of lovers is the same. That enormous emptiness carved out of such tiny beings as we are asks to be filled. The need for the new love is faithfulness to the old. Wait, don't go too early. You're tired. But everyone's tired, but no one is tired enough. Only wait a little and listen. Music of hair, music of pain, music of looms weaving all their loves again. Be there to hear it. It will be the only time. Most of all to hear the flute of your whole existence, rehearsed by the sorrows, play itself into total exhaustion.
I'll tell you something I told my Staples students this afternoon up in that cute little town, cute little high school. One of the most heartbreaking days of my life was the day I had to clean up my office in 2009 when I got fired. And I left it in a mess. I mean, I'm not proud of that. But it just seemed like the end of the world. It just seemed apocalyptic. Kind of like these days. I didn't know I was being gently nudged towards the greatest teaching job of my life. And when it was all over, the last thing that I dealt with in that office, smack dab in the middle of the table, was a Blue Flower Arts contract for Galway Kinnell. I was going to host him in my old series, and he was going to come the following fall. You guys, I got to admit this. I had the contract in front of me. I had a pen out, and I was holding it thinking, if I sign this, it's legally binding. My high school will have to host him, even when I'm gone, like a ghost. Maybe I would come and sneak in the back and watch. And I thought about signing it, and then I put the pen down and I tore the contract up. And I wrote California and New York and said, hey, okay, I'm getting fired, but I'm going to be okay, and you haven't heard the last of Jeff Johnson. And that prophecy came true. So, a couple things I told your sister class up in Staples today. I want to say a couple things about metaphor, and then I want to at least talk about the show and tell that they had that just was so wonderful. And we'll have one virtually. We'll have one in a discussion thread that Liz Tinsley will help me set up tomorrow. A couple things first. There was a Harvard teacher named I.A. Richards. I can't read his books. They're just completely unreadable. He was kind of a early-ish, mid 20th century rhetorician and professor, and he wrote these books with these audacious titles like "The Meaning of Meaning," right? And I can't read the books because he was such a nut that he invented his own system of punctuation, and then he used it for his books, which makes them, to me unreadable. So I read excerpts, I read about I.A. Richards, I kind of dance around him. He said one really valuable thing about metaphor. It's a three-part deal, okay? For Richards, you start with a vehicle. The vehicle is the thing that you begin with. And the tenor is the thing that you begin with, and the vehicle is the thing that you compare it to. And in between is the meaning. I misspoke there, sorry, I'm a little tired. A lot going on, much business appertaining. So if I say, if Shakespeare says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art lovelier and more temperate." Well, you start with the tenor, which is, hey, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're the woman, right? The summer's day is the vehicle, and what emerges in the middle is the meaning. I'll repeat it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art lovelier and more temperate, which can, at the very least, have a couple layers of meaning. I love you. You remind me of a summer's day. You're really beautiful. It's a little sadder to make the remark, but summer doesn't last very long, especially summer days. And maybe that poet, or the implied voice of Shakespeare that he sent forth to write that sonnet, one of the 152 that he wrote, maybe the poet is realizing, life goes by pretty fast. You're only going to be beautiful. We will only be beautiful for a little while. But I think old people are beautiful too, so I kind of regret even saying that, but it's too late. It's on the SD card. I also told my students in Staples that I appreciate metaphors and simile where the two things being compared. We've got to think about metaphor when we're talking about style. I love it when the two things are super far apart, like almost to the breaking point, the straining point, where it almost doesn't make sense. I told the story of encountering a figure of speech, a simile in a story I read in New Yorker a long time ago. It was about this guy who came home one day and he looked on the front lawn of his apartment. Everything he owned was piled on the lawn. All of his books, all of his clothes, all of his cooking utensils, everything. And he freaked and he went upstairs to the apartment, and I'm reading and it's like just a standard archetypical story of abandonment. But then when he got up to the apartment, he saw that it was completely sterilized and clean. His girlfriend had left him, thrown his crap out the window, and spent the entire day scrubbing the apartment clean. And then I encountered this simile. She was gone like a fart in a skillet. What does that even mean? I don't know. You can't get a fart in a skillet. I've never tried. I think it kind of means she was never there. It was a non-relationship, so to speak. It's the best I could pull out of it. Anyway, it went into my simile collection, which is in the attic. Yeah, that's where it is. It's up in the attic. Maybe the attic of my mind. I want to tell you one other thing about metaphor. A number of years ago, I don't know if any of you listen to public radio. If you live up in the Brainerd area, you have fantastic opportunities with public radio because it's everywhere in the state of Minnesota. Up there, it's 90.7 if you ever want to try out classical music. And there's a news station too. And National Public Radio has a show that I've been listening to for years that I would strongly recommend. They have a couple shows devoted to stories. One of them was called The Moth Story Hour. The other one is called This American Life, hosted by Ira Glass. A number of years ago, I heard a story on, every week Ira Glass takes a theme and then he collects stories from people all around the country on the theme, and then they tell their story. He records it. And years ago, I encountered a story by a guy who reported that for some reason, one spring, his body completely stopped producing testosterone at all, like zero. He went from being a dude to nothing, and that can happen. And he had things got a little strange for a while there in the weeks and months before the doctors kind of figured out, wow, you know what? You kind of need weekly testosterone supplements. So they started giving him shots, and they figured it all out. But before that happened, a few things were able to be remarked upon in that story. The guy didn't report life with zero testosterone as something painful or unpleasant, but he did report the obvious, that for a while he really had no desire to do anything. Like going out with his girlfriend or not going out with his girlfriend was the same thing. We can imagine that. Looking at the TV with it turned on was pretty much exactly the same thing as staring at the TV with it being off. But what mesmerizes me about this tale that the guy told, and it was almost kind of a side observation, for that period of time when his body was producing no testosterone whatsoever, he lost the ability to think figuratively, and he realized it. He couldn't think in metaphor anymore. He couldn't make comparisons. Or to put it another way, when he walked through the world, everything was completely concrete. Everything. He'd see a squirrel and say, okay, that's a squirrel. He would look at a tree and it would be a tree, but he couldn't think of it as the architecture of a tree, as the poet Czesław Miłosz would have it. And the stars at night were just the stars, not the vaunted dark, right? And once he got straightened out by the doctors and became himself again, he could think figuratively. I'm not saying testosterone is the key to metaphoric thinking, to being a metaphorian. We all have we have hormones in our bodies, right? Men have mostly testosterone, women have mostly estrogen, and then we all have, I think, a little dash of progesterone thrown in there too. Although I'm not a doctor. I'm an English major. It says something about the idea of metaphor and desire. It's just part of us. And I hope you find that Northrop Frye piece illustrative that I gave you from his very famous book, The Motive for Metaphor. And next week I got some challenges coming at me. President's Day Monday, even though I had a fake President's Day Monday until my students straightened that out. Tuesday I've got workshop at CLC, no class at Staples. Wednesday is the only live day I'm going to see my students. And I'll be back at Staples on live, Zoom-wise on Thursday, because a week from today I pick up Madisi Popa and her mom at CLC. And I pick up my podium on Monday, and that's going to be tucked into its little closet. The carpenters at St. John's Abbey Woodshop are all done with it. They're putting it together and putting the finish on it. It's going to sit in the shop all weekend, and the finish is going to dry up on it. And I've pitched it already once, and I'll probably pitch it again next week. I'll just say it again. It sure would be great to see one of you at my poetry reading next week. You'll have to identify yourselves, but it would be wonderful if I said this already, if one of you would come up to me and say, "Hey, it's me. I'm in your online class." I'll give you a hug if that happens, because I'm a hugger. I was even hugging people in the pandemic. Let's cut this right now. Keep it reasonably brief, and I'll see you next week. Staples only meets twice next week, but that doesn't mean you'll only have 2 videos from me. That A to Z box is open until Friday night. I just need an essay, a thought piece, 700 words, 800 words, whatever you can come up with. It ain't brain surgery. It's English. Love you guys. See you soon.